My husband mocked me in front of his lover and his friends while they laughed at me. Minutes later, he was begging me not to leave. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support helps us bring more powerful and captivating stories like this one. Now, let's get started. I never thought the man I once adored would one day become my tormentor in plain sight. The party was extravagant. Lavish decorations, expensive champagne, and a crowd of people William considered our kind, though I had long stopped believing I belonged. Then, in the middle of a toast, he turned to Ella, his latest fascination, and smirked. "Imagine waking up next to that every morning," he chuckled, motioning toward me. The laughter that followed, sharp and cutting, echoed like a blade against my skin. My hands trembled, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Ella, draped in a dress too tight for dignity, but just right for William's attention, giggled and leaned into him as if I were invisible. "William, you're terrible," she cooed, though her amusement betrayed no real objection. His friends, all men who had once shaken my hand with respect, now laughed as if I were a joke they had all been waiting to share. The weight of their mockery pressed against my chest, suffocating, crushing. My first instinct was to run, to disappear into the shadows and lick my wounds in silence. But something inside me, something long dormant, stirred. I felt the eyes of the other women in the room, some sympathetic, others indifferent. But none of them spoke up. They wouldn't. Not here. Not now. That was the unspoken rule of men like William. Their power was measured in how easily they could strip a woman of hers without consequence. My fingers curled into fists beneath the table. I had let him whittle me down for too long. Every insult, every dismissal, every betrayal, I had swallowed them all, convincing myself that this was just the way things were. But tonight was different. The candlelight flickered across his smug face, his arm draped around Ella as if she were some trophy he had won in a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting. I had been standing beside him for years, but this was the first time I truly saw him, not as the man I had loved, but as the man he had become. Or perhaps, the man he had always been. My silence had fed his cruelty, had given him permission to treat me as disposable. That permission was now revoked. When the laughter died down, I took a slow sip of my wine, my pulse steadying. I met his gaze with a calm I didn't yet fully understand. "You're right, William," I said smoothly, my voice cutting through the last remnants of amusement. It must be exhausting to pretend to be satisfied with someone for so many years. The shift in the room was immediate. Some looked away, others exchanged glances. Even Ella's smirk faltered. But William? He stiffened, as if the script had suddenly changed and he hadn't been given his lines. He recovered quickly, flashing his trademark grin, the one that had charmed me all those years ago. "Come on, darling, don't be so sensitive," he teased, but his voice carried a note of unease. I held his gaze, unblinking. He was used to me shrinking, to me biting my tongue until it bled, but not tonight. I let the silence stretch between us until his confidence began to crack. Someone changed the subject, something trivial, something meaningless. The moment passed for everyone but me. My humiliation had been public, yes, but something had shifted. William didn't know it yet, but he had made his last joke at my expense. I excused myself from the table with measured grace, walking toward the restroom, though not because I needed to compose myself. No. I needed to see something. Someone. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Her eyes, once dulled by years of compromise, now burned with something unshakable. Anger, yes, but more than that. Clarity. I see you now, William, and soon you will see me too. I straightened my dress, adjusted my hair, and smiled. A real smile, not for him, not for anyone else. For me. I sat in the empty restroom, the sound of muffled laughter still creeping through the walls like an unwanted guest. The cold marble counter pressed against my palms as I steadied my breath. But the storm inside me refused to quiet. I could still hear his voice, laced with mockery, still see the smirks exchanged between him and Ella. My humiliation had been their entertainment, and I had let it happen, again. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. For years, I had absorbed his cruelty like a sponge, excusing his behavior, pretending the man I had married still existed somewhere beneath the smirks and condescension. I had been patient. I had been understanding. I had been everything a good wife was supposed to be. And for what? So I could sit across from him while he openly paraded his infidelity like a badge of honor? So I could pretend that being ignored, belittled, and discarded wasn't slowly erasing me? I looked at my reflection, my fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. No more. The realization sat heavy in my chest, pressing down like an anchor. I wasn't weak. I had never been weak. But I had let him convince me that I was. That I needed him. That without him, I would have nothing. It was a lie I had swallowed whole, one that had kept me tethered to this miserable existence. And the worst part? I had let it happen. That truth stung more than his words ever could. But instead of breaking me, it ignited something inside me. I thought back to the girl I had once been. The one who had laughed easily, who had dreams of her own, who had never imagined that love could turn into a prison. She was still here, buried under years of compromise and self-doubt. But she wasn't gone. And tonight, she was clawing her way back to the surface. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly, letting the weight of my past decisions settle. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't cry. I would not give William the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I would give him something far worse. I would give him a woman he could no longer control. I wiped away a stray tear, but not out of sadness, out of resolution. If he thought I would simply endure this, remain the silent, obedient wife who accepted whatever scraps of dignity he tossed my way, he was mistaken. I had spent too many nights waiting for him to come home, too many mornings pretending the cold space beside me in bed wasn't a reminder of my own foolish hope. I was done waiting. I straightened my posture, smoothing my dress as I turned back to the mirror. The woman staring at me was no longer a victim. She was something else entirely, a force William was not prepared for. My silence had always been his greatest weapon. He mistook it for submission, for permission to treat me as nothing more than a footnote in his life, but he had made a miscalculation. My silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. Tonight I would not rage. I would not beg. I would not give him the drama he craved, the proof that I was still under his thumb. Instead, I would watch. I would listen. And I would prepare. The game had changed, and William hadn't even noticed. Not yet. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the glass, as if I needed to be sure she was real. She was. And she was furious. Not just at William, but at herself. At all the times she had smiled through the pain. At all the nights she had waited up for a man who no longer cared. At all the moments she had let herself shrink to fit inside the small, suffocating box he had built for her. That woman was done begging to be seen. A slow, steady breath left my lips, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine life without him. The idea had always been there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, but I had never dared to hold on to it. Now, it felt less like a fantasy and more like an inevitability. My heart pounded in my chest, not with fear, but with something thrilling, something electric. The kind of certainty that couldn't be ignored. I leaned closer, whispering to the reflection. To the woman who had been waiting for me to wake up. He does not get to decide your worth. He does not get to break you. Not anymore. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but powerful all the same. I straightened my shoulders, tilting my chin up just slightly. Yes, there she was. The woman he had tried to bury beneath years of ridicule. The woman who would no longer play her part in his charade. For years, I had believed that staying was the brave choice. That enduring the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal made me strong. But real strength wasn't in endurance. It was in knowing when to walk away. And I was ready, more than ready. A strange, almost giddy feeling bubbled inside me. It wasn't joy. Not yet. But it was something close. Something like freedom. William had spent years shaping me into a woman who would never leave. But he had failed to realize one simple truth. Even a caged bird remembers how to fly. I turned. Away from the mirror, my decision sealed. Tomorrow, the game would begin. But tonight, I would savor this feeling. The knowledge that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was awake. When I stepped back into the party, the air felt different. Or maybe it was me. The music still hummed through the speakers, the glasses still clinked, and the conversation still carried on in that polished, meaningless way. But I was no longer just another fixture in the background of William's life. I was something else now, something he had never expected. I moved through the crowd with a deliberate grace, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. My pulse was steady, my expression unreadable. William didn't notice me at first. He was too busy entertaining his audience, his arm lazily draped around Ella's waist. But others noticed. The wives, the friends, the acquaintances who had witnessed my humiliation just moments before. Their eyes followed me, some with curiosity, some with caution. Ella was the first to feel the shift. She stiffened slightly, her smile faltering just enough for me to catch it. Good. She had expected me to disappear, to sulk in some dark corner, while she basked in the glow of William's attention. But I had done the opposite. And now, she was the one uncomfortable. William finally looked up, and for the briefest second I saw it, the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, anger, a scene, but what he got instead was composure, unwavering and unshaken. I tilted my head slightly, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. Let him wonder what had changed. Let him squirm. "Darling," he drawled, forcing his usual arrogance back into place. "I was just telling Ella how stunning she looks tonight. A real vision, wouldn't you say?" He was testing me, waiting for me to react, to flinch. I didn't. Instead, I reached for my champagne flute, taking a slow sip before answering. "She does," I said smoothly, letting my gaze settle on Ella just long enough to make her shift in her heels. Then I turned back to William. "It's a shame, though." He frowned slightly. "A shame," I exhaled, as if weighing my words. "That all of this," I gestured around us, to the people, the luxury, the pretense, "means so much to you. And yet you don't seem to realize when you're losing the only thing that ever really mattered." I smiled again, just a touch. "But then, that's always been your flaw, hasn't it?" The room had gone quieter. Not completely, but enough for me to feel the tension ripple through the air. William's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively pulling away from Ella's waist. I could see it now, the first seeds of doubt planting themselves in his mind. He had spent years believing he had control over me, that I would always be the silent, obedient wife who tolerated his cruelty. But that illusion had shattered. I finished my drink and placed the empty glass on a passing tray. "Excuse me," I said lightly, turning away before he could formulate a response. And just like that, the power had shifted. The ride home was drenched. In silence, thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm, William sat beside me, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly, his jaw clenched as if he were physically restraining himself from speaking. For the first time in years, he was uncertain. I could feel it in the way he glanced at me, from the corner of his eye, in the way his fingers tapped against the steering wheel in an uneven rhythm. He was trying to piece it together, to make sense of what had changed. He expected me to lash out, to cry, to scream. That's what I would have done before, what he had trained me to do. Because that reaction would put him back in control. If I was emotional, he could dismiss me as irrational. If I was angry, he could twist it into hysteria. But I refused to give him that gift. Instead, I sat there, calm, unbothered, watching. The city lights flicker through the window as if this was just another ordinary night. A deep breath from his side. Then, finally, his voice, low and measured. "You embarrassed yourself back there." I let out a small, humorless laugh, keeping my gaze on the passing streets. "Did I?" His knuckles whitened against the wheel. "Don't play games, darling. You've never been good at it." I turned my head then, meeting his gaze for the first time since we left the party. His confidence had cracks now, tiny fractures beneath the surface. He was rattled, though he'd never admit it. "Maybe I've just never played the right game," I murmured. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You're being ridiculous. You're upset, and I understand that. But let's not pretend you're suddenly someone new. You knew who I was when you married me." My fingers curled in my lap, but I didn't let my expression shift. That was his defense. Always. This idea that I had willingly signed up for his cruelty, that I had agreed to be diminished simply because I had once loved him, as if love was a justification for suffering. "You're right," I said, my voice even. "I did know. But what you never realized, William, is that I'm done pretending I don't." The car jerked slightly as his grip on the wheel tightened. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head again, this time with forced amusement. "God, listen to yourself. What are you even saying?" I turned back to the window. "You'll see." He let out a short, humorless laugh, but there was an edge to it, a flicker of something he wasn't used to feeling, doubt. William had spent years certain of me, certain of my compliance, my silence, my willingness to endure. He had built his kingdom on the belief that I would always stay. But now, for the first time, I had disturbed the foundation. The drive stretched, on, the silence thickening, pressing against us like something alive. He wanted to say more, to bait me, to regain his control, but I wouldn't let him. The tension coiled between us, suffocating and unspoken, and that was exactly where I wanted it to be. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one drowning in it. He was. The moment we stepped inside the house, the tension that had been simmering between us in the car exploded into something thick and suffocating. William tossed his keys onto the marble counter with more force than necessary, his movements sharp and restless. He was waiting for me to break, to fold into the version of myself he was used to. Timid, apologetic, desperate for his attention. But I stood there, composed, my arms crossed loosely as I watched him with something dangerously close to indifference. He let out a humorless chuckle, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's hear it," he said, his voice carrying that familiar blend of condescension and amusement. "You've been brooding all night, so go on. Get it out of your system." I tilted my head, studying him like a puzzle I had finally figured out. "You think this is about tonight?" I asked, my voice calm, measured, You really think this is just about you humiliating me in front of your friends and your mistress? His smirk faltered for half a second before he forced it back into place. Oh, don't be dramatic. Everyone was drinking, laughing. No one took it seriously. I stepped closer, my gaze unwavering. I took it seriously, William. And the worst part? It wasn't even the first time. His expression darkened. You're making this bigger than it is, he muttered, grabbing a glass from the counter and pouring himself a drink. His movements were quick, defensive. Every couple has rough patches. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. A rough patch? I repeated. That's what you call years of neglect? Of insults disguised as jokes? Of walking into a room and treating me like I'm nothing more than an inconvenience? I shook my head, my throat tightening. I spent so long believing I wasn't enough. That if I was just a little more patient, a little more understanding, you'd remember how to love me. I took a deep breath, my voice steadying. But you never forgot. You just never cared. His grip on the glass tightened. He wanted to interrupt, to deflect, but for once, I wasn't going to let him. I know about Ella, I said, my voice softer now, almost pitying. I've known for a long time. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. His entire body tensed. That's ridiculous, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. You don't even try to hide it anymore, I whispered. Maybe you think I'm too weak to leave. Maybe you think I need you too much to walk away. I tilted my head, watching him. But tell me, William, do you still think that now? For the first time, he had no words, no sharp retort, no smug comeback, just silence. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, annoyance, maybe even unease. But then he scoffed, shaking his head. So what? He muttered, setting his glass down with a dull thud. You want an apology? You want me to get on my knees and beg for forgiveness? Is that what this is? I let out a slow breath, my shoulders relaxing. No, William, said. I don't want an apology. His smirk returned, victorious, as if he had won some imaginary battle. That's what I thought, he said, grabbing his drink again. I smiled then, small but certain. I don't want an apology, I repeated, my voice firm. I want out. The sound of glass shattering against the floor filled the room. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the kitchen, but I didn't flinch. William stood there, his fingers still curled as if he were holding something that no longer existed, just like his control over me. His breathing was sharp, uneven. The air between us was thick, charged with the weight of words that had never been spoken, truths that had been ignored for far too long. You want out, he repeated, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. He let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. Oh, please, don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't last a week without me. I smiled. A real one this time. Not out of amusement, but out of something deeper. Pity. That's where you're wrong, William, I said, my voice calm. I've been surviving in spite of you, not because of you. His jaw tightened. I could see the calculations running through his mind, the way his body tensed as if he were preparing for a fight he hadn't anticipated. William thrived on control. He manipulated, belittled, twisted reality until the people around him questioned their own sanity. But for the first time, none of it worked on me. He scoffed, grabbing a napkin to wipe the spilled whiskey off his hand. Fine, he muttered. You want to play this game? Go ahead, pack your bags. But don't come crawling back when you realize how pathetic you are without me. I tilted my head, watching him carefully, That's cute, I said. You still think I'm the same woman who needed your approval. He set the napkin down with a sharp snap, his eyes narrowing. Let's be real, sweetheart. You have nothing without me. No career, no connections. Hell, even this house. My name is on it. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to something venomous. You walk away from me, and you walk away with nothing. I let out a slow, steady breath. I had expected this. The moment he realized I was serious, he would try to strip me down, reduce me to nothing so that leaving felt impossible. It had always been his way. Keep me dependent, keep me small. But he didn't realize something. I wanted nothing from him. You're right, I admitted. You built this life. You shaped it exactly the way you wanted. I met his gaze, unwavering. And now you can keep it. He blinked. I saw it then, that flicker of panic. He had thought this was just another argument, another moment where I would break, where I would beg him to fight for me, for us. But there was no us. Not anymore. And that terrified him. I turned on my heel, walking past him, my movement steady, deliberate. I felt his stare burning into my back as I climbed the stairs, as I entered the bedroom we had once shared. But it no longer felt like ours. It was just a room, just a space I was about to leave behind. The suitcase was waiting in the closet, tucked away like an escape plan I had been too afraid to use. I pulled it down, the zipper's sharp sound cutting through the silence. One by one, I folded my clothes, my hands steady. This was real. This was happening. I wasn't running. I wasn't leaving in anger, in heartbreak. I was leaving because I deserved more. Footsteps echoed in the hallway before he appeared in the doorway, his frame filling the space like a shadow. His confidence was cracking now, the arrogance slipping away. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. You're really doing this, he muttered. I glanced at him, then back at my suitcase. I am. He let out a breath, stepping further into the room. Come on, don't be like this, he said, his tone softer now, almost coaxing. We've been through a lot, haven't we? I paused, looking at him fully. Yes, I admitted. And that's exactly why I'm leaving. A flicker of frustration crossed his face, but he swallowed it down, replacing it with something more calculated. Fine, go ahead. Leave, he said. But don't expect me to come running after you. I smiled again, this time with certainty. I wouldn't want you to. His lips parted slightly, as if the words stunned him. For the first time, I saw it. The realization that he had pushed too far, that there was no coming back from this, that I was gone, long before I had even stepped out the door. I zipped the suitcase shut, pulling it off the bed with ease. Then, with one last glance around the room that had once been mine, I turned toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The morning air felt different, lighter. It was as if the weight I had carried for years had finally begun to lift. I stood by the window of my new temporary apartment, sipping coffee as I watched the city wake up. Cars honked, people rushed to work, life moved on, just as I had. But my journey wasn't over yet. Leaving William was only the beginning. Now, it was time to take back control. For years, he had painted himself as untouchable. A man of power. A man who knew how to keep his affairs hidden beneath layers of charm and deceit. But I had seen behind the curtain. I had witnessed his carelessness, his arrogance. And what he never realized, what he never considered, was that I had been watching, learning, collecting. I sat at the small wooden desk, opening my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a second before I started typing. William Carter, CEO, investor, socialite, fraud. The last word made me smirk. He had spent years siphoning money through his businesses, using shell companies, laundering his dirty secrets through accounts hidden under false names. I had seen the signs, the late-night calls, the sudden influx of cash that had no paper trail. And his infidelity? He was just as sloppy. Receipts, reservations, private messages sent from his work phone. He had never been as discreet as he believed. He thought I was too naive, too weak to ever fight back. That was his first mistake. I pulled out a small leather notebook from my bag, flipping through pages filled with dates, numbers, details. My insurance policy. The evidence I had gathered over time, knowing that one day I would need it. Every secret he had tried to bury, I had quietly unearthed. A knock at the door snapped me from my thoughts. I exhaled, pushing my laptop aside before opening it. "You're right on time," I said, stepping back as my lawyer walked in. She smiled, setting her briefcase down on the table. "You sounded ready," she said, arching an eyebrow. "And from what I saw in your email, I'd say William is about to have a very bad day." I nodded, handing her the notebook. This is everything. His offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions, expenses tied to his extracurricular activities. I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. I want him exposed, legally, publicly. I want him to feel what it's like to lose everything. She flipped through the pages, her expression sharpening. "You weren't kidding," she murmured. "This is airtight. You could go straight to the authorities." I took a slow sip of coffee. "We will. But first, I want him to watch everything, unravel. Because William wasn't afraid of consequences. He was afraid of humiliation. He thrived on the illusion of control, of power. If I had left quietly, he would have rewritten the story, cast himself as the victim. But I wasn't giving him that luxury. My lawyer set down the notebook, smiling. "So what's the plan?" I leaned forward, my fingers drumming against the counter. "First, I want him cornered. I want the right people to start asking the right questions. His investors, his board members. I want them to see the cracks." Smirked. "And then?" I exhaled slowly, my eyes darkening. "Then, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." William had spent years controlling me, manipulating me, dismissing me. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. Then came one of the most important days in this history. The event was grand. Of course it was. William never settled for anything less than extravagant displays of power, of wealth, of control. The ballroom was bathed in golden light, chandeliers dripping from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Men in tailored suits and women in shimmering gowns moved through the space, glasses of champagne in hand, voices rising in laughter that was too polished to be real. His world, his kingdom. And tonight, it would crumble beneath him. I stood near the entrance, my heart steady, my breath slow. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. There would be no second guessing, no hesitation. I had spent years in the background of his life, a supporting role in the narrative he controlled. But not tonight. Tonight, I was the one holding the script. I took a step forward. Eyes flickered toward me, curiosity stirring beneath the surface. I had been invisible for so long in these circles, nothing more than William Carter's wife. But tonight, I wasn't just his wife. I was his reckoning. Near the center of the room, William stood with a glass of whiskey in one hand, his free arm resting possessively around Ella's waist. She was draped in silk, her laughter light and effortless, the kind that told the world she had already won. Poor thing. She didn't realize the game was over. The moment his eyes landed on me, I saw it, the flicker of surprise, quickly buried beneath forced indifference. He hadn't expected me to show up. I smiled, slow and knowing, watching as he stiffened, ever so slightly. His mind was already working, already trying to anticipate my next move. "Darling," he said smoothly, removing his arm from Ella and stepping toward me. "Contain the situation. Control the narrative." He was predictable that way. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world." The music played on, the guests chatting around. Us. But there was a shift in the air. People were listening now, sensing the tension. I took another step, letting my voice carry just enough. "It's such a big night for you, isn't it? Your investors are here, your business partners." I exhaled, shaking my head as if in admiration. "Truly, I don't know how you do it, William. All this success and managing your extracurricular activities." Ella stiffened. William's fingers tightened around his glass. The cracks in his mask were beginning to show. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice even. I let out a soft laugh, reaching into my bag. "No? Well, let me refresh your memory." I pulled out the small stack of printed documents, the receipts, the transactions, the hotel bookings. I didn't need a microphone. I simply lifted my voice just enough for the crowd around us to hear. "This one's a personal favorite," I said, flipping through. $4,300 spent at the La Fontaine Hotel. Impressive, really. I let my eyes flick toward Ella, then back to him. "I assume that wasn't a business expense?" The murmurs started. Soft at first, but growing. The air thickened, the weight of truth pressing into the room. William's face darkened, his posture shifting from forced calm to something dangerous. "That's enough," he said through gritted teeth. But I wasn't done. I pulled out another document. "And this one," I continued. "Oh, this is interesting. Offshore accounts, shell companies, money missing from your investors' pockets." I clicked my tongue, shaking my head. My, William. You've been a busy man." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to each other, whispers spreading like wildfire. I could see his investors shifting uncomfortably, his colleagues exchanging glances. The weight of suspicion settling in. William took a step closer, his voice low, lethal. "You have no idea what you're doing." I met his gaze, unwavering. "Oh, but I do," I whispered back. Then, I turned toward the crowd, my voice steady, unwavering. I spent years standing beside this man, watching, listening, learning. I exhaled, lifting my chin. And now, I'm done being silent. Security was moving toward me, but it was too late. The damage was done. I had planted the seed of doubt, and William's carefully constructed world was already beginning to collapse. I leaned in one last time, whispering so only he could hear. "Check your email, darling. I sent everything to the authorities before I walked through that door." His face paled. I smiled. And then I turned and walked away, leaving the ruins of his empire behind me. The fallout was swift, merciless, and absolute. By the time I woke up the next morning, the world had already turned against William Carter. News articles flooded the internet, exposing the financial fraud, the offshore accounts, the missing funds. The media feasted on every sordid detail, unraveling the empire he had built with arrogance and deceit. His investors, once loyal, once blind, were now furious, demanding explanations he couldn't give. His company's stocks plummeted, his business partners distanced themselves, and the whispers of lawsuits grew louder by the hour. I sipped my coffee as I watched the morning news. The anchor's voice smooth and detached. Prominent businessman. William Carter faces allegations of embezzlement and financial misconduct, with reports suggesting legal action could follow soon. Sources claim insiders have provided damning evidence, though Carter himself has yet to make a statement. I let the words wash over me, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. It's done. Authorities have everything. Expect an arrest soon. I leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. It was strange, this feeling. Liberation. Relief. A peace I hadn't known in years. I had imagined this moment so many times, had dreamed of watching William's world collapse the way he had, tried to collapse me. But the reality was even better. I didn't just leave him. I had erased him. By noon, the press had stationed themselves outside his office building. He tried to enter, tried to salvage the remnants of his crumbling power, but the cameras caught everything. His forced smile, the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his security detail struggled to keep the reporters at bay. And then came the final blow. Ella left him. I had predicted she would. She wasn't built for scandal. She had been drawn to him for his wealth, his status. But a man sinking in legal trouble, a man facing public disgrace, that wasn't the William she had seduced. The moment his accounts were frozen and his reputation destroyed, she was gone. One swift, clean break. I almost laughed when I saw the headline, William Carter's mistress moves out amid legal troubles. He must have been livid. By evening, I received another text. This one from a number I hadn't seen in weeks. You ruined my life. I hope you're happy, William said. I stared at the message for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. So many things I could say. So many responses I could craft. Instead, I simply typed back, No, William, you ruined your own life. I just turned on the light so everyone else could see it. And with that, I blocked his number. Let him drown in the wreckage. Because for the first time I was free. Freedom felt different than I imagined. It wasn't just the absence of William's voice in my ear. The end of the belittling. The weight of his expectations no longer pressing against my chest. It was quieter, softer, more personal. It was the first sip of coffee in the morning without tension coiled in my stomach. It was waking up in a bed that was mine, in a space that was no longer shared with a man who saw me as an accessory rather than a person. At first, the silence unnerved me. After years of existing in William's shadow, I had forgotten how to live in my own light. There were moments I caught myself waiting for a fight that would never come, preparing for an argument that no longer existed. But slowly, the fear faded. The need to justify my every action disappeared. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone anymore. I was accountable only to me. Therapy became a lifeline, not because I was broken, but because I refused to carry his damage any further. My therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, saw through my defenses immediately. You weren't just in a marriage, she told me. You were in a slow war of attrition, and you won. I had never thought of it that way. I had seen myself as a survivor, as someone who had escaped. But a victor? That was new, piece by piece. I started reclaiming myself. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned long ago. Painting, reading, writing. I enrolled in a business course, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to understand the systems men like William used to keep women like me dependent. And more than that, I wanted to make sure I was never in that position again. The first time I walked into a job interview, my hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but the unfamiliarity of it all. William had once told me I wasn't built for the workforce, that I was too soft, too fragile. That had been a lie he fed me to keep me under his thumb. Because within 2 weeks, I had an offer. I wasn't just rebuilding. I was thriving. And then came the unexpected part. The moment I realized I wasn't just healing for myself. I had joined an online support group for women who had left abusive marriages, not intending to participate much. I was there to listen, to learn. But then, one evening, a woman posted about how she felt trapped, how she wanted to leave but didn't know where to start. Her words mirrored my own thoughts from months ago. So I answered. I told her she wasn't crazy, that her pain was real, that leaving wasn't just about walking away, it was about breaking free. I shared pieces of my story, just enough to show her that she wasn't alone, and she responded. Then another woman did, then another. Without realizing it, I had become someone for someone else. And that, more than revenge, more than exposing, William, more than anything else, was the real victory. I had found me again. Not as William's wife, not as his victim, just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough.